Hello, everyone. This is Arthur Ragat with Ultria, and I'm joined today by Braden Robinson. It is the top of the hour for those of us on either the U.S. or European times. We're going to give everyone another, 3, 4 minutes to come in. We see a bunch of folks attempting to connect, and we know that WebEx has been a little overtaxed in the last few weeks with everyone working from home. So please bear with us while we allow some of your other community members to join our session today. A little bit of housekeeping for those of you who are on or who have just joined. There is a Q&A tab because right now all of your phones are on mute. So if you have questions, we'd love to answer them. We will try to answer them. So please, during the session, please feel free to fire off questions to Braden or I, and we will do our best to answer those as we wrap up. As another gentle reminder, we've blocked about 45 minutes. This will end at 11:45 Eastern Time, giving everyone time to run from their home office into their kitchen to get ready for lunch. For anyone who might have seen a post or two in the last day or so from Ultria and from myself, I promise this was a sort of not a fear-mongering session. This is really all about how to use one of our technologies in a standalone or non-integrated mode for extracting information out of your contracts, whether it be metadata or perhaps even working with us when it comes to clause identification and risk identification. All right. There we go. We just had another half dozen folks join. So just in terms of, I'm going to beg everyone's patience. I'm going to give everyone another minute just because it seems like we're getting 3 or 4 more every 30 seconds. So it's about 3 minutes after the hour. And basically, I'm just talking so that when people join the session, they know that this is, in fact, live. This is Arthur Ragat with Ultria. I'm joined today by Braden Robinson. And some of you who may have joined our Frankly Friday session last week had a chance to hear Braden go through sort of AI and analytics with respect to the Ultria CLM. Today's session is focused very much on standalone artificial intelligence, where we've taken one of our products, Orbit is its name, and broken it out separately to help organizations really leverage the assets that are their contract data. And it looks like we're starting to level out in terms of number of attendees. So last bit of housekeeping, there is a Q&A tab as part of your WebEx session. Please do use that Q&A tab to ask questions. We love to hear your questions. We'll do our best to answer them during the session or immediately thereafter. If it's very specific to your particular need, we may ping you afterwards with a quick email response. So take no offense if we don't choose yours as one of those sort of general question and answers. I hope everyone is safe and well, and that your families and colleagues are likewise weathering the storm appropriately. We know that it's not easy for everyone, and we do appreciate you taking the time on a Friday to learn a little bit more about artificial intelligence in the world of contract analysis and data extraction. So I promised earlier, I was going to leave my video up just until we sort of got started. Again, not to scare anybody who might be walking around you and the like. So let's just kill my video. It'll give me some bandwidth back. And let's begin. So as we begin our session today, Friday, April 3rd, our session today is standalone artificial intelligence power for your contract migration and metadata extraction needs. I'm joined today by Braden Robinson, senior consultant with Ultria, and Braden was kind enough to run all of last Frankly Friday session without me, since we had some communication issues thanks to a bad dongle, I guess, for lack of a better term. But we'll try to keep this fairly light. We'll try to make this very hands-on. And really, this is just about sharing some information. So again, please use the question and answer tab as you do. Braden, assuming your voice has recovered from all that chatting last week, it's great to have you on the bridge.
It's great to be here.
Here we are. It's funny. We're all sort of getting used to the work from home. Watching our late night talk show hosts doing these one-on-one sessions from their house. I guess this may become the new norm. And certainly, I have to wonder whether accelerating to the new norm is probably a healthy thing for many of us. Today's agenda will only be 45 minutes. The idea being to give you guys some time to sort of get ready and hustle to the kitchen and get there before someone steals your food. All the normal stuff. We'll spend maybe 5-10 minutes max, sort of going through some overview slides, just to sort of help paint a picture of what artificial intelligence in a standalone mode for contracts looks like. In other words, these are things that are often built in, at least to the Ultria CLM. But for many of you, making a choice in a CLM may now be slightly delayed, or your decision-making process is going to take a little bit longer than you anticipated. We want to make sure, though, that if there are aspects of the data extraction or the analysis or things that you need to get out of your existing contracts to answer some really pressing business questions, that capability exists. So we'll sort of run through a high-level overview and then jump into a hands-on, and we'll run through our Orbit product in terms of how it works, how it extracts metadata, how it learns from user feedback, and how it is effectively a great tool for what we'll call the citizen scientist within your legal operations team, rather than the data scientist within your IT team. Nothing against data scientists. We have a bunch of them, but it's sort of hard to find these folks, and very few of them really understand contract terms and words and phrases and how to sort of disassemble a contract. So by leveraging the citizen scientists, legal operations, contract management, category management folks, to improve the way your artificial intelligence process runs with your contracts, just makes good old-fashioned common sense. Then we'll take a slight break and sort of look at Orbit specifically for identifying risk factors within contracts. And we'll do a brief preview of what we'll be showing during next Tuesday's session dedicated to COVID-19 specific risk factors and how Orbit can help you find them from within your contracts. And as promised, 4 or 5, whatever minutes needed to answer whatever questions the audience may come up with. A little bit of probably one more piece of housekeeping. For anyone who is having trouble looking at the screen, remember to say view full screen on your WebEx console. For those of you who are not seeing the screens advance, you may have been disconnected. Hopefully you're still hearing the audio. Do ping the Ultria marketing login that you may be able to see in WebEx and ask for help, and we'll try to help you out. So some of you may know who Ultria is. I'll just do a very high-level survey here. Ultria has some of the strength in contract lifecycle management that is AI-powered, and we really have embedded artificial intelligence throughout the core CLM, which is sort of the 3/4 of this particular graph, as well as separated out our AI engine called Orbit for independent use. So there are ways that artificial intelligence can help the intake process. This might be through robotic process automation for intake, disassembling third-party content so that you can extract metadata, use that metadata to route the contract review and approval process, or maybe identify differences between your core templates and the way third parties might have written the same kind of clause. You may also want to be able to do deep analytics against your contract repository and on an ongoing basis pull additional metadata information from those contracts that you've already signed and use that information to help make decisions, as well as sort of run a business a little more effectively. And these could be simple things like effective dates or expiration dates. Or for an NDA, maybe how long do I have to keep this information confident before I can trash it, throw it out, or put it up on a YouTube video, right? On a post-award signing, you may have contracts that are tied to your operational platforms. These could be your sourcing and procurement platforms. These could be your sell-side CRM platforms. But using artificial intelligence to mine for risk factors or for non-performant variants to help you manage that business a little bit better, this sometimes is just best served by letting the machine do all the work, or most of the work, and then you having to make those hard decisions based on the information that the software gives you. And then Orbit, which really takes these components and puts them sort of aside so that they're no longer directly linked just to the Ultria CLM, but now they're available regardless of where your contracts live. Heck, we'll even show today how you can just drag them from a folder and process them within the Orbit AI platform. So before jumping into the AI platform, this is sort of the paid advert, just to remind you folks that when we think about the contract lifecycle solution, we really do look at the lifecycle piece of that very seriously. So being able to handle everything from the request to the renewal in an integrated environment, all delivered on Amazon Web Services in the cloud in a very safe, secure, and highly scalable way for global deployments. So this scales both up to those large organizations with tens of thousands of users, as well as sort of scrolls down to maybe those more 1 to 2 billion in size kind of organization, maybe a little bit smaller, that simply have a distributed team or a lot of contracts to manage. So it starts with the request to have a contract drafted or to have a contract reviewed, moves through the drafting and internal review process into the external negotiation process, and then moves to the sign-off process at step 4. So steps 1, 2, and 3 are sort of considered pre-award or pre-signing steps. And then once it's been signed, then we get to look at how to really maximize the value from your contract assets through post-award compliance and milestone management, a lot of which Braden covered last Friday and is certainly a very cool thing when it comes to realizing maximum value, or at the risk of overusing the term ROI, return on your investment, from those contracts that you've worked so hard to negotiate favorable terms from. Last but not least, the ability to manage and to get in front of and to be proactive when it comes to renewal as well as contract expiry. And both for sort of buy-side contracts and procurement and sourcing, as well as sell-side contracts when it comes to maximizing renewal revenue and even modifying or increasing net deal size, knowledge in advance is power. Reacting to someone saying, hey, we're about to expire, or we expired last week, don't you want to renew, is not power. So really the purpose of having a full contract lifecycle platform is to put the power in your hands rather than the other parties. So over the last few months, and especially over the last few weeks, we've been getting requests from our existing customers to provide additional analytics support by decoupling or making available our artificial intelligence engine, sort of called Orbit, and letting Orbit run on contracts and other documents that may not be built into the Ultria CLM or not currently stored in that CLM. So Orbit really is that personification. I mean, you've got to have a little mascot. You have to have a name that captures the artificial intelligence capabilities of our solution. Ideally helping you streamline and work through a good part of your contract management process, but increasingly also for contract analytics and post-award. So it has sort of three flavors or personas: Orbit Guide, Orbit Explorer, and Orbit Protector. And today we're going to focus on Orbit Explorer and Orbit Protector. The guide is the piece that helps you intake contract requests. Think of it as a guided wizard. Many of our customers don't even realize there's AI behind it. It is simply intuitive and easy to use. It helps you bring things into your contract management cycle. Orbit Explorer is sort of like an assistive environment that allows you to identify and find and quickly explore thousands and thousands of contracts within your repository to draw key information for your further analysis and planning purposes. Orbit Protector takes that power of Orbit Explorer and sort of implements it in real time to put up a set of rails or guidelines to ensure that folks in the contract process, whether it's intake, whether it's review and approval, whether it's editing, whether it's negotiation, or even post-award management of performance of the contracts, basically don't hurt themselves. One of our customers said, it's like someone telling you not to run in the hallway with scissors. You can certainly disobey it, but we're going to be really noisy about it if you do. So today, and I'll make this quick so we can get into the product itself, things that Orbit currently embodies and is in general availability or production release is full stack support for migrating or loading legacy contracts into a CLM, or to provide contract analytics from contracts that exist in other data stores, data repositories, document repositories, or just hanging out on a shared drive someplace. This includes an optical character recognition engine to take your images of your scanned PDFs, TIFFs, etc. contracts and convert them into something that technology can read. Further, we have a natural language processing engine that cleans up and corrects a lot of the things that an OCR process brings over. For instance, maybe somebody signed it and faxed it in, so you've got page footers and headers from the fax machine. Or it came in with wet signature and stamps and legal stamps that were on top of content that you really wanted to see. Or maybe it just came in two-column format. It came in upside down, and the OCR engine has no idea what to do with it. Well, that's where our artificial intelligence-powered NLP comes into play to make the OCR content better and provide more complete readability for the Orbit engine. Additionally, we can extract metadata as well as normalize or calculate values based on metadata that's within the contract. Further, it identifies common clauses. It can export all of this information into an environment for further analysis, whether it's our dashboard or just as possible, your Tableau, ClickView, etc. environments. Now, a little bit deeper into OCR and NLP, and we'll see this today, is we leverage two commercial engines, both Abby and Nuance, that we track emerging projects like Tesseract for things that might be even better in terms of OCR accuracy and completeness. The NLP then addresses for things like multi-column, header-footer removal, and that middle bullet, line break and paragraph conversion, is incredibly important for folks because it helps the software understand context across different lines. OCR is generally one line at a time, and it may not make the connection for hyphenated words or simply sentences that wrap, or phrases or content or intent that span multiple paragraphs. That is what the NLP takes care of for us. Now, I use the term metadata pretty, casually. And maybe that's just because of the space that Ultria is in. Metadata is simply data from your contract that means something to you for that contract. Now, there's also metadata that is about the contract that is not sort of in line. For instance, the owner of a contract or the lead author. These are things that you can't determine just by reading a file. You need to have context in. So Orbit provides both the ability for you to add tagged information for that kind of external metadata, but also to extract common metadata elements from your contracts. Things like document numbers, things like master agreement numbers, and whether this is a sub-agreement or a follow-on work order or task order to an existing agreement can be determined by Orbit. Contract parties, internal and external. Well, internal you may think is obvious, but sometimes you have different business units or different signing authorities. What are the key dates? Was it effective on the date signed? Was it effective on the date last signed? Was it effective on the date first signed? Was it effective because someone wrote a date down in the beginning of the preamble? Governance, jurisdiction, arbitration regions. Just a quick sample of what we extract. We'll see some of that today in the demonstration. Just as importantly, though, Orbit has published accuracy numbers, which is somewhat unusual in our space. So we are currently accurate in the high 80s, between 85 and 87%, and our coverage is running between 86 and 88%, meaning that the ability to find metadata if it is in an agreement is quite high, and the ability to extract that correctly is also quite high. To make it better and to make it more specific or more personalized for a particular account or use, we have closed loop feedback. That's a machine learning algorithm that allows those citizen scientists to correct or amend data. And then the next time Orbit runs against your contracts is that much more accurate. Additionally, there's basic normalization, alphanumeric conversions, for instance, taking a 5 FIBE year contract and noting that it has a 60-month contract term when we store the metadata. I'm sort of running out of time, so I'll sort of skip over what the next features will be. We'll talk a little bit about the risk factors for COVID-19, but let's go ahead and jump right into a demonstration. So let me come back to my sort of core dashboard here, and we'll go into batches mode. I'm just looking at the vid monitor. It looks like everyone can see this. Let's go ahead and let's sort of pretend, or we'll actually run through. Let's create a simple batch that has files that are both PDFs and doc. So say this is frankly Friday on the 3rd. Let's take a look at different contract types. Orbit is smart enough to have different patterns based on what kinds of domains. It's pretty good in the generic sense, but sometimes you want to optimize that or you want to tune it for your own use. So in this case, I'm going to say, take a look for, I don't know, distribution agreements or master agreements, and we'll just say this is a Friday test. Now, what I'm doing sort of manually could also be done automatically through the API, through a repository pull, but I thought for our purposes today, let's go ahead and sort of select particular files just to prove it out. So one Word file and one PDF. Now, before we get too much farther, a lot of you may say, well, maybe this is fully staged. I'm opening up right now a PDF, and I will share it on my WebEx. Should be full screen. What you guys are seeing is the PDF they were about to process. It is not searchable. It's got highlights. This looks like a good real world example. It's got some I don't know what in the corner, a little smudge and a number. I get down towards the signature page. It's been signed over the text. It's got a couple of stamps, and it even has a sort of an SOW slapped onto the back end. So I'm just going to minimize that and come back to Orbit. Let's go ahead and analyze these files. Yeah, I want to analyze the files in this batch. Right now, it's going through the process of pulling both the doc file and the PDF. It's running both the OCR and the NLP. I think that PDF was, I don't know, 6 or 7 pages. We can go back and look. And as it's sort of running through the process, it is extracting metadata, and it's also building an index of those files. Ooh, it's completed. Let's go in and take a look at this batch. Now, the first one was the Word file. That was probably pretty easy. Let's look at that one second. Let's go to the PDF that was converted to a text file and just jump right into it, shall we? So we see on the right-hand side fields that have been blocked in blue. This is metadata that Orbit has identified. I can sort of scroll down and scroll through, and we see that we've also sort of taken what was a two-column PDF, and now we've created a single column, much easier to parse and read if you're a computer, file format. On the left-hand side, we've got all of the various fields that have been populated from a metadata perspective. And if I click on these, it'll move me to that section in the document where Orbit extracted the information. This also gives me the ability, and I mentioned it before, to be able to tag or correct metadata. So let's say the contract title, I want to get rid of this funky little logo thing. All right, I did that. Contract owner, we're going to make today's contract owner Graydon Robinson. As I sort of navigate through, I see some other interesting things. Let's see, contract term. Let's take a look at term and termination and see what we have. I notice when I hit the effective date, I go back to the top because that's a date that we extracted. But when I look at expiry or contract term, it doesn't move me around. The reason is that Orbit has done some calculation and normalization. See here that the term was for 4 years, FOUR, not the number 4. And what we've told the system is, I want to track my term in years, and I want to track it with 1 decimal place. An expiry date is calculated based on my effective date, in this case, plus 4 years. So I went from July 18th to the 18th of July, 2012. I also flipped into a European file format for the date, because this happened to be an Italian contract. As I scroll down, I'm surprised that I don't see jurisdiction in governing law populated. That should be something that we grab, but the reason we missed it, and this really is to sort of show you how things happen and how the citizen scientist can use the AI-based machine learning to make Orbit perform better or more personalized for your instance, is that the only place we see a reference is in the severability clause. So if I come here and I find Commonwealth of Massachusetts, I highlight it, and you can't see my keyboard, but the moment I lift my mouse, or in this case, the click on my laptop, it says you found something. You probably want to tag it because that's the mode that we're in. And what I want is I want the Commonwealth of Massachusetts to be my jurisdiction. I start typing for the metadata tag. It finds jurisdiction. I say OK. And now it populates it here on the left-hand side, meaning that it was a copy and paste, much easier, less error prone. But now if I wanted to be maybe a little more specific, or let's say even less specific, I want Massachusetts to be my governing law because maybe my database only has a place for a single reference. So rather than state of New Jersey, or Commonwealth of Mass, I just want to see New Jersey or Mass. And the tricky bit here, of course, is all of this information is populated. And if I hit the approve button, will be saved with the contract as contract data. Now, let's just take a quick look at what it's done with the clauses. It's created an index document for me. So if I wanted to move around, I can simply click on my index and quickly manipulate through my contract. This is sort of key if I'm looking to accelerate my review. Now, it gets it right most of the time. I mentioned high percentages, but let's just say that Section 7 here, property rights, it probably isn't reps and warrants or reps and certs as we have it here. What Orbit does, though, for every one of these is assign a primary hit as well as the top 3 in terms of percentages. It then provides a list of all the other available clauses underneath. So what it's done is it's provided some base mapping, so I can use this as an intake process or a triage process to identify what clauses are new, different, if they're different, how different, and whether I need someone to review those. That could be an attorney, it could be a non-attorney legal professional, it could be outside counsel, it could be legal services or an LPO. The idea being, of course, you can use this kind of analysis not just to manage risks, but also to identify your best cost routing. Very important given the uncertain economic times we're coming into. But in this time, let's just go ahead and map property rights over to intellectual property, because clearly this is work for hire clause, who owns the work, and we'll simply choose that second choice. Now, when I click on approve, it is going to feed that information, as well as the information that we updated on the metadata, back into Orbit. And Orbit is now going to know that when it sees words like that in a clause or a paragraph like that, I should go ahead and treat that information a little bit differently. Now, I mentioned the other document. This distribution agreement was a Word doc, so probably a little bit more easily or more, I'll say, better structured. Now, in this case, it looks like it has gotten both the metadata populated equally well, contract term, expiration date, a little more verbose. It's pulled out the jurisdiction and governing law because the title of the clause was a little bit more indicative. But the clause categorization, on first blush, looked a little bit off the first time I ran this. If I look at the fourth clause here, distributor responsibilities, the mapping says insurance. And then 99% insurance. So for those of you who are skeptics of artificial intelligence, let's take a quick look and realize that most of the words under distributor responsibilities really is, let me see, distributor shall subscribe and maintain throughout the term insurance covering public liability and such insurance of industry and medical industry, and the manufacturer is going to request a copy of the insurance, right? So clearly this is actually an insurance clause. Happens to be that in this particular model or this particular contract, a distributor needed to have some serious amounts of insurance, probably to make sure that there was limited liability back to the original license or patent holder, etc. There is at the end that the distributor shall be responsible as the first point of contact, but that feels secondary to making sure. So this too is basically how Orbit works. And when we find these kinds of discrepancies, Orbit can notify the reviewer that, by the way, this looks like it's something you should look at and help an organization make those choices. So we've updated this to insurance. Let's go ahead and say approve. Yeah, let's go ahead and approve this. And our work is done. Orbit's done a lot of that. And by the way, for those of you who are curious, Orbit can run thousands of contracts across an hour or 2 hour window with a very high level of accuracy. We use an awful lot of gear. Now, let's just say that our work is done, so to speak. But what I want to do now is move this information into an environment where I can perhaps report on it. I want to go ahead and take this information. I want to take the metadata. I want to take party information, and I want to share it with something else. I can select those contracts, create sort of an outbound batch bundle. Now, I have a little, oh, good, you can see that screen popped up. This is opening up a copy of Excel. I'm going to add Excel to my share list real quick. Perfect. And now what we've seen is the information from an agreement, happens to be from an MSA, no surprise, contract term, effective date, all of this created as what amounts to be a CSV or an Excel file. And as I mentioned earlier, this could also simply be an API or programmatic connection to another platform for additional analysis or validation. So sort of jumping back, if I can, into our PowerPoint, just a brief touch on leveraging, so to speak, the Orbit environment for risk analysis going beyond simple clause and what I'll say is a simple metadata extraction. Now, I'll come back to this concept of a risk factor analysis, but given sort of the light of where we are all today, we've had a lot of folks asking for what can we do to help them, specifically our customers, in identifying our risk factors. That's where the Orbit environment comes into play with our Protector offering. So Orbit Protector allows us to take particular kinds of documents and process them against known risk factors. So I'm going to pick something that's relatively, I'll say, innocuous, right? Let's just take a quick look at an NDA as an example. So I'm bringing an NDA in. Now, it's taking a second or two to do a process. Unlike the metadata extraction of Orbit Explorer and the simple clause identification of Orbit Explorer, Orbit Protector goes a little bit deeper. It's looking word for word, line by line, for things that you might have described as specific risks. So if I just look at an NDA, things that people are concerned about, by the way, there's obvious stuff, right? I'm looking for governing law. I'm looking for jurisdiction, right? Yes, these things are there and straightforward. Remedies relief, we often see that simply being as injunctive relief. But let's take a look at the things that make your information people go a little crazy. What are my post-termination obligations after my NDA is complete? All right, do I have to destroy? Do I have to give a certificate of destruction? Of those kinds of things. Am I looking for simple injunctive relief? What are my assignment rules? So what Orbit Protector does, there we go, retention of any kind of confidential information. So Orbit allows us to do this kind of complex capability mapping for risk factors based on a fairly large database that we already have, millions of clauses, hundreds of thousands of contracts, and just as importantly, risk information that has been contributed to by the community of Ultria CLM and Ultria Orbit users. To sort of go into a specific model, look at, let's say, COVID-19, really the folks here are interested in force majeure clauses. Does my force majeure clause have an out for pandemic or epidemic, or is it lacking that? If it's lacking that, then I need to create a quick amendment. Also, at a sort of a broader level, what clauses do I have that may enable renegotiation or outright cancellation of supplier or customer relationships, and how does that work? So if I look at the current COVID model, and really just an extension of our normal risk factors, is within Orbit Protector, we're able to train the engine based on existing contracts. And just as I did the metadata mapping for jurisdiction or for let's say termination dates, we have the ability, and you have the ability, to provide input into the risk factor model for Orbit, train these by creating new entities, and then by running that against your contracts, we're able to pull for each contract which risk factors are present in those contracts. And if we take a look across these risk factors, I can very easily see which contracts and which clauses or paragraphs have those particular risk factors, with an identifier as to how close or how distant that particular section, segment, or clause is to the risk factor that we've asked it to search for, and then give us the ability to export this into a platform or file, as well as tag each individual contract, so that from a contract review perspective, I can quickly see the risk factors that are embedded within each of these contracts. So for us, what we have done, and hopefully I really should have said for you, we've created sort of a limited use, rather fixed and finite, and I'll say price assured project package, turnkey, that will take up to 10,000 of your documents, run it through Orbit Protector specific to force majeure, supplier risk, customer out kind of clauses to help identify where you may not necessarily have, I'll say, revenue or resiliency, as well as where you might find supply chain agility for those organizations trying to get ahead of the curve, so to speak. I know I think my timing is almost spot on. I promised we'd keep this to 45. We started 5 late, but I think we have time for some questions. Braden, I know last week you did all the chatting and I was just frustrated in listening. Today I did all the chatting. Do you have any questions from the boards that you want to share?
I'll read some of the questions for you.
Hey, cool.
Okay, here's the first one. Which parts of the Ultria AI are available for standalone?
Oh, perfect. So the Ultria AI, so Orbit specifically, Orbit has 3 components. There is the Orbit Guide, which helps with the intake process, and that is integrated into our Ultria CLM and the Ultria intranet request portal. So that is not available standalone. Orbit Explorer and Orbit Protector are available standalone, and they can be put in front of a DMS or an enterprise content management platform, if you've got one of those, or can even just be, you saw me grab some files off of my local disk. You could also put it in front of a SharePoint mount for parsing and reading.
Okay. The next one is, they asked specifically about SharePoint, but you can talk about in general. How long would it take to set up Orbit?
Oh, that's a great question, especially when you've got folks asking for questions and you're staring at 5,000 contracts and not quite sure where to start. Orbit, because we are software as a service and we are secure in that, both things coming in, things at rest. We use Amazon Web Services, SOC compliant, all the stuff that your InfoSec and ITIS guys are nervous about. We've got covered. We can start really, really quick. What we find is for, let's say, feeding files from a CMS or from SharePoint, it's a matter of just getting your guys to let loose with your data controls. Bundle them up, send them over, put them up on a mount point. We can give you a secure mount. We're talking turn it on within 24 hours of getting an order signed. And then if we're just looking at, let's say, risk factor analysis, if you're looking to do sort of a one and done, you can have results in 24, 48, 72 hours, depending on the number of contracts you have.
And this sort of plays on your last one. Do you need to subscribe to Orbit or be an Ultria customer to use the COVID response?
Oh, no, that's a great point. So, for this particular COVID bundle, and I think we have a session on Tuesday morning, that's going to focus just on the COVID risk model. We are making available to pretty much anybody right now, just because people are hurting, I guess, or they could use a little bit of extra boost, the COVID risk factors. So that's just a turnkey service. We don't have to subscribe. It's limited in use. Depending on how many contracts you have, we'll determine how long it's going to take, and we'll give you access to the platform for that analysis. So no, you don't have to be an active Ultria customer. We are providing a lot of that to our customers today. You don't have to be subscribing to a year-long use of Orbit. In fact, we'd love you to maybe use this, try it out, and then maybe we can chat about a longer relationship. I think on time frame wise, I think we are just about wrapping up. Any other last minute questions? Okay. Yeah.
I think you covered a lot. Maybe. Yep.
Hey, sorry about that. With everyone sort of being remote, there's a sort of a built-in delay for voice over IP as we've all sort of moved into that mode and moved away from our desk phones. So, Braden, thank you very much for joining and for moderating our questions. To the participants who joined today, hey, thank you very, very much. If you're interested in any of this, please reach out, either visit our website. We certainly have a a new website. It was updated last week specifically for the orbit components. There's also probably a tag or a landing page out there for the event for next Tuesday. And I'm sure we'll follow up with email invites for anyone who's looking specifically for COVID-19 risk factors. And I promise for that event, there'll be no fear mongering. This is becoming sort of a little bit of the new normal. Many of us are used to being, that work from home or remote on the road, or used to be hotel lobbies and airports. Not so much anymore. But as the hashtag goes, alone together, we'll get through this. I wish you all a safe and sound weekend to you and yours. Thanks very much. Oh, for any questions we didn't answer, we'll come back to you either personally if they're specific, or generally in a sort of a blast email as a follow-up. Thanks, everyone.